It's our last chapter in financial accounting, and I wanted to walk you through this chapter 12 notes to make sure you fill out those necessary information and give you a quick example of how to do the indirect method. So let's walk through this a little bit. Make sure you have everything down that you need to have down so that you're ready to finish up this course. First, going through the chapter, make sure you fill out the necessary information. Why we use the statement of cash flows, what is it good for? And then we're going to define each of these sections. But I really want to make sure that you fill in completely this example here. It's taken right out of the book and it goes through the cash inflows and outflows from each section in the statement of cash flows. Since the statement of cash flows has these three sections, very important to know what goes into which one. So that operating section, and I really cannot stress enough how much you need to know the details, so I want you to fill it out in total, but I want to give you some quick little hints on how to remember also what goes where. So under the operating section, this is just anything used to operate the business. That'll be helpful. So any of those sales of goods that produce the income, talking about looking at the balance sheet and looking at that accounts receivable, accounts payable. Investing, on the other hand, some things to remember about investing are property, plant, and equipment. The property, plant, and equipment are one of the most common areas in the investing section. We are also looking at any other long-term assets, but this is one that's missed often. Finally, in the financing section, I want you to think about the balance sheet and think about the stockholders' equity section. That's what is going to go in here, and your bonds, which we'll have to review a little bit about anyway, but that's what also goes in here. But that stockholders' equity section of your balance sheet is what's going to go into that financing section. So fill this out in total because a lot of your test questions are going to be, what section does this belong in? So moving down, I want to also kind of walk you through this indirect method to find that statement of cash flows. So that operating section, that first section, looks at your cash and what has happened to the cash throughout that time period. The problem is there's probably hundreds and hundreds of transactions involving cash. So an easier way for companies to do this is start with our net income and kind of work our way backwards to get to the cash piece of this. So this is right in your books as well. It's a little equation that you can get to figure out those net cash provided by the operating activities. The first thing you're always going to add back are things like depreciation and non-cash expenses. So make sure you get those added back first so you don't forget. You're going to deduct any gains on sales that we learned about in our previous chapter, the gains on sales of assets, and then we're going to add back those losses, because all of those are both non-cash related. And then the final thing we're going to do is analyze. And what we analyze is our balance sheet, the assets and the liabilities, to see how they impacted our operating activities. So I want you to go through your book and make sure you understand the impact on whether we add or subtract each of these items to find that operating section. One thing you'll want to will hopefully help you remember this is assets. We do the opposite. And then liabilities, we're going to do the same. What I mean by that is you can see here we have a decrease in income tax payable. That's a liability, so we would deduct that since it was a decrease. Whereas because it's a liability, we do the same. Here, inventory. Inventory is an asset. Since I have an increase in inventory, I'm going to deduct, because assets do the opposite. So to get down to that operating section, we have to look at whether we have the changes in our asset or the changes in our liabilities. So that should help you through that. Now let's go through a quick example of this. So you'll get a balance sheet with different items on it, and it'll show you everything that's happening during the year. We're trying to now build the operating section of the balance sheet. We're trying to figure out that change in cash. So we don't look at that cash part. But what we're going to do is go through each section and figure out if it is an operating section, what impact did it have over the years? So here I have an increase of 3, right? From the beginning of the year to the end of the year, that account increased by 3. My inventory increased by 12. Property, plant, and equipment, remember, this is goes in the investing section, so we're not going to look at that. And although accumulated depreciation would also go into that investing section, the difference in our accumulated depreciation is actually the depreciation expense for the year. So we're going to end up adding that back in. Looking at the accounts payable, we had an increase here of 4. Bonds payable will go into the financing section. Common stock would also go into the financing, as well as the retained earnings. So let's look at what this operating section looks like in the indirect method. We start with our net income. Our net income here is $153. I get that by reading that paragraph at the top. The paragraph also tells me that cash dividends were paid. Remember, cash dividends, those go into the financing section as well. So they are not part of that operating section. Next, we're going to go through and say, always remember to add back depreciation. It's because that's one of those items that are easy to forget. So we'll add back that 45. Then I have an increase in accounts receivable. Since that is an asset, and I have an increase, I would subtract that difference. Next, I have an increase in inventory. Since again it is an increase and it's an asset, I would subtract that. And finally, I have an increase in accounts payable. That's a liability. So if I have an increase, I'm going to add. So I would add that $4. That would give me a total net cash provided by operating activities of 187. So that should give you a quick summary of how to do a very simple indirect method operating section of the cash statement. That's really as far as you need to get, besides looking at what goes into each section. The final thing in this chapter is to look at the other 2 sections, what goes there, and then to understand the equation for free cash flow. Hopefully that helps. If you have questions, please let me know.